if we look at this, once upon a time, there was science, the scientific method, and a process of engagement termed dialogue. To engage in dialogue, one had to respect others by listening to their differing opinions and thereby share in a process that would lead to a value contribution for the benefit of all. And then he goes on, it is lamentable that a Canadian leader has chosen tyranny over dialogue in authentic science. So this is Ian Weinberg, a neurosurgeon and neuromodulator I follow on LinkedIn. And we can see, this is always what science has been about. It's been about discourse and conversation. Typically, revelations don't come from the central thinking. And I think it's Brett Weinstein that said this, that most discoveries throughout humanity, scientific advancements throughout humanity have come from the fringe, not the general consensus. So Galileo, for instance, who declared that the earth revolves around the sun, he was deemed a heretic. That was fringe science at the time. So as we've seen throughout history, typically advancements and understandings come from the outside, the fringe. And if you don't allow that discourse, that conversation to happen, if you censor and silence that, that's not science. That's not progressive, and that's not democratic. And it's extremely authoritarian and frightening. If you're not concerned about censorship, you need to be, because right now it's not you, but one day it could be. So and then we have this piece of information. What do they know that we don't? China has not administered a single mRNA vaccine to any of its 1.45 billion citizens. And so as I was talking about earlier about most of the democratic nations being co-opted by the CCP, you can start to envision a narrative where, they've been able to infiltrate countries, governments, medical institutions, colleges, think tanks, and with money and influence, kind of dictate how policy is rolled out. And so you can imagine if this was some sort of bioweapon that had a mid to long-term die-off event, mass die-off event, they would essentially have no trouble taking over the rest of the inhabitants. I think they've rolled out around 10 billion doses. So that's about half the world's population at two doses per person. So about 4 billion people have been received this gene therapy. So imagine if all they had to contend with was half the world's population in every country, and in a completely destabilized military. They would have no trouble doing that. So when you start to look at the bigger picture, the fact that they could be controlling this narrative, the fact that this thing was developed in a lab in Wuhan in China is obviously a big red flag.